Examining IL code is simple. The .NET Framework even gives you a tool that you can use to disassemble managed code and can display the IL code stored inside any executable file produced by a .NET compiler. Disassembling and viewing your code can give you more insight into how your code is compiled. You can look at any types you're using and the modules that you're calling. The IL code can also be used for debugging your application. Now, although you're not likely to use it, at least not for a long time, the .NET Framework also includes an assembler that takes raw IL code and compiles it into an executable exe file or DLL file. Most developers program in a high-level language like Visual Basic or C#, but you're quite welcome to program directly in IL if you like. There are rumors that some Microsoft super programmers prefer this way of coding, but for the most part, we mere humans are better off being more productive with C#. It really is pretty easy to examine the IL of any given assembly. So I'm going to go ahead and load up the disassembler and show you the code for test.exe, the real simple hello world kind of application that I created earlier. Alright, so I have a developer command prompt for Visual Studio 2015 open. And all I need to do is invoke the IL-DASM, move that out of the way, and tell it what file I want it to look at. So I'm going to go to Learn Now, Samples, and test.exe, and hit enter. And that opens up this GUI. So this is the IL-DASM window. All right, so I'm not going to get too deeply into the IL code itself, but I just want to point out some of the interesting features of using this tool and the IL itself. So I'm going to start by double-clicking on this manifest node, and that opens up this other window that displays various metadata information about this assembly. Among other things, it lists the assemblies that this program requires, as well as other information about the assembly. So this is the metadata that's contained within the assembly. Okay, so you can see there's a token, you can see that it uses the MS Core Lib, which is the .NET Framework. It instantiates various things, and you can see the other information. Basically, this is just the information that the CLR needs in order to execute this program when you run it. Okay, now this is also a very simple application. I didn't include any custom attributes or copyright information or that sort of information. So this metadata is pretty sparse. But in a real application, particularly one that you create with a Visual Studio project template, there's likely to be quite a bit more. And then I'm going to expand the Hello World node here. And I'll double click on the main void. So this is that main method that I included within the application. And so this is the IL code for the main method. So you can see some similarities with the C# code. It's a method that wasn't explicitly, it was explicit in the C# code by the form or the syntax that I used. But I used the public keyword because this needs to be visible external to the Hello World class. It's static, it returns nothing, so it's a void, and then has a main. And then it doesn't take any parameters, so there's no parameters that are passed in here. It also explicitly identifies it as managed code. Okay, and then you can kind of follow through and more or less guess what's going on. So it's loading a string, so that has something to do with getting that string value in memory. And then it's going to call this method, and it's in the MS Core Lib, and it's in the system namespace .console. So this is quite similar to the code, although I didn't have to identify which library it was in. And then this is the syntax for calling a method, and it passes in the value of the string parameter, which has been loaded right there. And then it calls that, and then it returns from the method without returning any other value. Okay, so that's a very brief taste of IL code. And again, if you want to write your own IL code instead of writing it in your applications in C#, feel free. You can do it. Microsoft has a lot of documentation for that and a lot of support, but you're not very likely to be real productive using it.